Good evening and welcome to Art UK's Unlocked Talk. I'd like to thank Art UK and Bloomberg Philanthropies for inviting me to talk about the Ipswich collection, and also to Jolliffe for helping with all the preparation and presentation work. I am the Collections and Learning Curator here at Ipswich Museums, and I have a responsibility for the British and European art and decorative collections. And tonight I'd like to give you a little overview of some of those collections, but importantly focus in on the Suffolk-born artist John Constable and his early career, and the lesser-known artists and mentors that supported him locally here in Suffolk. So, to set the scene, Ipswich, if you come and visit on perhaps a sunny day like this, you will find Christchurch Mansion in Christchurch Park in the centre of the town. It's a Tudor building and was built on the grounds of Holy Trinity Priory. And here we can see a watercolour by the artist Paul Samby, which shows you an elevated view across the back of Christchurch Mansion and off towards Ipswich there. And you can see a number of historic and important churches. Now, this is a historic view, but today the house contains an amazing selection of furniture, ceramics, glass, decorative arts in general, and also important collections by Suffolk artist Thomas Gainsborough and John Constable, alongside many different regional artists. Now, the house itself was originally built by the Witherpole family, and here we can see Peter Witherpole, who was the son of Edmund, who built the house. And building started in 1548 and went on until the 1560s, really. And this little painting is in the main hall as you come in and enter. And we're free to come and see. So when you come in, you'll find this little painting. And here's a view of the main hall. After the Witherpole family, who built the house, their line sort of descended into the Devereux family, who owned it for a number of years. And then they eventually sold it to the Fonerow family. So there were like 3 different families who owned the house. And the Fonerow family, again, had the house for many years during the 18th century and sort of the beginning of the 19th century. And this is a view of how they would have had the main hall with lots and lots of pictures. And they eventually sold the house put it up for sale and the contents in 1892. And I'll just give you a quick flick to what the main hall looks like today. So as you come in, this is the space which you will see. And when the house was put up for sale in 1892, it and the surrounding park was bought by a property syndicate who had decided to, their plans were to basically demolish the building and build houses on all of the parkland. Now, fortunately, Felix Cobbold of the banking and brewing family, Ipswich family, Felix thought, this was a terrible idea, and quite rightly so, and he decided to buy the house outright and give it as a gift to the people of Ipswich on the condition that the park would be saved as well as the house. So this is a portrait by John Collier that was presented for the collection, and it hangs in the main hall. I'll just flick back, you can just about see it in one of these slides. And Felix Cobbold, when he died, not only did he save Christchurch Mansion from being demolished effectively, he also left a bequest, which was to go to purchasing artworks and decorative items for the collection. And a lot of that bequest over the years from 1909 has gone to fund lots of important acquisitions. So I'm aware of time, and to give you a kind of whistle-stop tour for about some of our collections, and this is interesting to focus on this painting by the artist Jan Porcelis, Dutch, very important maritime artist, and it's only recently been identified as being by him in the collection, thanks to the work of Art Detective, and it was cleaned with support from funding by our friends of the Ipswich Museums. And it just goes to show that we have a number of Dutch and Netherlandish pictures in the collection, and there's a really important connection between East Anglia and Europe and the European collections here. We also have a number of historic portraits in the collection from Tudor and Stuart times, a really interesting selection that focuses in on well-known families in the area. So this one in particular of the Devereux family, and then also local characters, Tobias Bloss. This one is also on display if you come and visit. So not only are there Dutch and Netherlandish artworks, historic portraiture, but also artists who have moved into Suffolk or been part of artistic communities. And that's can be shown through the work of Philip Wilson Steer, the British Impressionist, largely based at Walberswick. We have various images that relate to his time at Walberswick, just on the Suffolk coast, and also the East Anglian School of Painting and Drawing, set up by Arthur Haynes and Cedric Morris. And we have a number of artworks that are connected with students and Cedric Morris and Arthur Haynes as well. So over the sort of fairly more recent years, we've really focused in on building up our collection of Suffolk female artists. I can only pick out one or two here. So this wonderful portrait by the artist Anna Airy. Anna Airy was for many years president of the Ipswich Art Society, and she regularly exhibited at the Royal Academy shows. This portrait is from 1918, really interesting sort of fashion that the sitter is wearing, and we've got a number of other oils by Anna Airy in the collection. And probably only a couple of years ago, we managed to acquire this painting with the Art Fund and the V&A Purchase Grant Fund, and our wonderful friends of Ipswich Museum all supported the purchase and conservation of this large-scale triple portrait by the artist Doris Zinkhuisen. Now, Doris Zinkhuisen and her sister Anna were very interesting artists from the 1920s through to the 1950s. They came to call Suffolk their home, and they worked in theatre, portraiture. During the war, they were involved in, supporting the St John's ambulance, but also Doris Zinkhuisen herself went out to depict what happened out at the concentration camps at Bergen-Belsen. And we hadn't any work by the sisters in the collection, so we were really pleased to acquire this, and it shows her daughters dressed in yellow and pink, Janet and Anne Graham Johnston, who were children's book illustrators. They illustrated 101 Dalmatians, along with lots and lots of other children's books. And in the white is Julia Heseltine, who was Anna Zinkhuisen's daughter, and she became a very interesting, significant portrait artist in her own right. Now, that was a whistle-stop tour of some of our art collection, and really want to now focus in a bit more on John Constable and his early career, and really sort of explore some of his creative beginnings through our Ipswich collection. So Ipswich has been collecting artwork by Constable since the 1890s, and this is an oil that was very early acquisition to the collection, showing the avenue of trees. And now it means that Christchurch Mansion really is the only place in Constable country where you can come and see John Constable's work, not just on its own, but in context of the artists that inspired him, like Thomas Gainsborough, but also his Suffolk contemporaries and the people that kind of mentored and nurtured his career from Suffolk. So it's probably worth just a quick overview of Constable's backstory for those people that don't know it already. But he was born on the 11th of June 1776. His mother was Anne, and she's seen here with her dog, and his father was Golding Constable, and we've got a portrait of his father here by the artist Daniel Gardner. He was the fourth child of the Constables, and they were to have 6 children in total. And he was born at Eastburg Holt House, which was the sort of newly built family home. And the Constables have made their money and sort of higher position in society through their work in milling and trade on the land and the water. And Constable was really being sort of prepared for a life in that business, but it wasn't something he was terribly interested in pursuing. And his main passion, even as a young boy, was to sketch and draw. We also have in the collection a portrait of his younger brother, Abraham, which you can see next to Anne. And it's kind of fortunate, really, that the Constables had the younger son, Abraham, because he did take on the family business and shoulder the kind of responsibilities at home. So I'll move on swiftly. And so the young Constable, when he was a sort of teenager, when he's supposed to be working in his father's mill, actually ends up carving a picture of the mill on one of the timbers, and the timbers still survive today and are in the Colchester collection here, dated to 1792. And also here in Ipswich, we have a really good selection of early Constable artworks. So the watercolour from 1794 of a rural landscape could be where Constable is perhaps looking at topographical prints for inspiration, but there might be a nod towards local landmarks. There are certain bridges locally, which this could possibly be, but we've only recently acquired this particular early watercolour, so more research to be done, I think. So the Constable family weren't artists, and so if their young son was declaring this passion for art and sort of seeking a creative career, where was he to go for a kind of mentorship or somebody that would encourage that creativity? Well, just a few doors down from the Constable house lived John Dunthorne, who's often referred to as John Dunthorne Senior, and he was an older man of a kind of working class background. He married a widow who was a fair few years his senior and moved into Eastburg Holt, and he was able to be a kind of master of all sorts of different trades: carpentry, glazing, plumbing, and painting pub signs, hatchments for churches. even at one point creates a kind of label, a plaque for one of Constable's pictures later on. So the young John Constable and John Dunthorne become friends. They go out sketching in the local area, and this painting in the Colchester collection of Flatford Lock is the only securely attributed painting to John Dunthorne Senior. I'm sure there's more out there, but this one we have in the Colchester collection, and it goes to show that they're out walking in the local area together. And it's important to recognise that early on in Constable's career, when he eventually gets to London, he writes to John Dunthorne to really kind of pour out his heart about his thoughts on his future career. And Dunthorne is the one that receives the letter where Constable explains that there is room enough for a natural painter, which really becomes his sort of artistic agenda quite early on. So not only were there Dunthorne to thank for sort of artistic encouragement, we also have the very interesting Elizabeth Cobbold and Ipswich people, really. So Ipswich was a place that Constable became quite familiar with. He had family who were based locally. There were the Constable's physician lived in Ipswich, art collectors, all sorts of people. But the Constable family knew the Cobbolds, and Elizabeth Cobbold married into the family in particular. She is, this is a portrait of her. She was born in 1765. And by the age of 22, she published her second volume of poetry, which was dedicated to Sir Joshua Reynolds. She married in 1790 William Clark, who was the Comptroller of Customs in Ipswich. And so that was the reason she moved down from up north to Ipswich, and he was 34 years her senior. So actually he died the following year, just after their marriage, and left Elizabeth Cobbold in a very wealthy position with land and buildings and all sorts of wealth. And at the same time, John Cobbold had also been recently widowed, and so the two quickly became associated together and would subsequently marry. So in 1791, shortly after Elizabeth Cobbold's first husband had died, so she took on 14 children of John Cobbold, and the couple together would have another 7, so a very large family. And during the year that she got married to John Cobbold and took on the 14 children, she also produced a novel. Not quite sure how she achieved that, but she did. And she had a great interest in writing poetry and also the natural world and her surroundings. She would take her brood of children out into the parkland and go digging for fossils in the crag pits locally. And her way of also building up connections with lots of different scientists and naturalists. She would strike up friendships with James Sowerby, and then, as she was unable to present her own findings and research publicly, because she was a woman, she would get her sort of leading scientists to do that for her. And the little shells are now, they're named after Elizabeth Cobbold in her honour, the little fossil shells, which is Asilla cobboldii. And she also enjoyed organising large social networking events, I would say, and bringing lots of different people together. So John Constable would visit Elizabeth Cobbold's house, which is at the Manor House on St Margaret's Green, and that is a stone's throw from Christchurch Mansion. So he would go and stay with them and meet other artists like Daniel Gardner. But importantly, in January 1799, he met the Quaker poet Priscilla Wakefield, and she was so impressed with Constable's artistic ability that she agreed to write a letter of introduction to the London-based artist Joseph Farrington. And this would really ease Constable in to a professional career as an artist and being able to go to London to study, particularly to convince Constable's parents it was possible. And he does go to London and meet with Joseph Farrington. And Farrington writes in his diary in 1799 that he met J. Constable of Ipswich. And that's a really nice reference to Ipswich, in that Constable's introduction to the London art world isn't as J. Constable of East Bergholt or Flatford, it's J. Constable of Ipswich. So a really lovely connection for Ipswich there. Now, we've talked a little bit about John Dunthorne Sr. and Elizabeth Cobbold, but there was another artist, Suffolk-born artist, who had already kind of influenced Constable, and that was Thomas Gainsborough. And Ipswich has a very interesting collection of oils and works on paper by Thomas Gainsborough. There is also the fabulously reopened Gainsborough's house in Sudbury, where the artist was born, that people can go and visit and find out more about him. This view near the coast was the kind of landscape that that Constable would really enjoy looking at, and it was probably based on the time when Thomas Gainsborough lived in Ipswich in the 1750s and would wander down the banks of the River Orwell. And Constable really had the artist George Frost to thank for more of an introduction to Gainsborough. Now, George Frost wasn't an Ipswich-born artist. He came from Suffolk and moved to Ipswich to become the person running coaches, horse and coaches, from Ipswich to London on the Blue Coach line in the 1770s. And he also developed an interest and probably more of an obsession on the artist Thomas Gainsborough, and will build up his own collection of artworks by Gainsborough. And Constable came across a reference to Frost in 1797, where it describes Frost as a drawing master. And certainly by 1800, I would imagine that Frost and Constable had met and were now wandering around the sort of places in Ipswich and along the river that would provide inspiration for both of their artworks. Now, Frost was a self-taught artist. He was very prolific in his sketches, and Ipswich houses over 400 artworks by George Frost. Lots of them are tiny sketches in 2 albums, and most of them are on Art UK if you want to have a look. And he made a point of drawing, you know, ordinary people out on the streets or in the centre of the town, working animals like sort of scraggly looking dogs or donkeys, and different events that happened. So this in the top corner, there's a stranded whale which was beached on the sort of riverside there, and there's lots of descriptions about how badly it smelled. But George Frost decided to do a little sketch of it, and actually the bones of the whale are in the Ipswich Museum collection. The mills, there were a number of mills which Constable and Frost drew. So Stoke Mill, which is up near Ipswich railway station, and there's a little sketch there. And also Frost was, you know, returned the favour by going to East Bergholt and drawing locations that Constable would have very much known, such as the church here as well. Now, as I mentioned, Frost had this obsession with Gainsborough, and towards the end of his life, he actually had his own sort of major oil that he had acquired by Thomas Gainsborough of this scene, which is the Mall, St James's, and which is the Gainsborough version is now in the Frick collection in New York. And Frost decided he would produce his own copy of it, pretty much size for size, and these are large oil paintings. And this was down at his house on the Common Quay, which is down by the docks in Ipswich. And it must have been amazing to be in quite a small room and have these two large scale oil paintings alongside. So Frost died in 1821, and this was one of the last paintings that he did. And from the sale of his effects, Constable had a number of Frost drawings in his collection, and he was certainly very fond of, you know, sort of this early tuition in sort of sketching and drawing in Ipswich by the artist George Frost. Now we move on rapidly to two of the paintings in the Ipswich collection, which are probably the most significant and were painted in 1815. This is interesting because now Constable has very much, you know, established his artistic outlook. The sort of days when he would go out sketching with Frost and Dunthorne are all very much part of his foundation as an artist. And these two views show the views from the back of the house he was born in. They're from upper windows, and they weren't painted at the same time, but they were during the summer of 1815. And they're a kind of panoramic view, really, across Constable World. They were painted at quite a poignant time because there were lots of sort of shifting changes with Constable's parents and Constable's hopeful marriage coming, you know, soon. I'll just give you a view of the house itself so that you can kind of see where Constable might be in one of these upper windows. And it was a house that Golding built for his family because he had a growing family, and there was a place that they needed to expand. Unfortunately, the house is no longer there. It was demolished in the sort of 19th century because I think it had gone to sort of rack and ruin, really. But Abraham Constable, when he put it up for sale, does provide quite a nice description, which that had 4 excellent sleeping rooms, a spacious landing, good attics, you know, capital cellars and brick stables, a coach house, and every convenience that can be thought of. So very lovely location. Now the flower garden, painted in the summer of 1815, was after Anne Constable, who had been responsible for planning out and actually planting the garden. She had unfortunately fallen ill in the garden earlier in the year, and subsequently would pass away in the March of 1815. Now Constable didn't attend her funeral for whatever reason, and I always think that these two smaller scale artworks are painted as a tribute to both of his both Anne and Golding. And so the flower garden is in this kind of heavy shade over all the sort of blooming flowers. And the kitchen garden is the very much industrial landscape of his father. We've got the vegetables growing. Priestley, the gardener, is working down in the garden. And on the distance, you can see a windmill. which, you know, the source of kind of Constable family wealth, and also in the further distance amongst the sort of clump of trees is the rectory where Maria Bicknell, Constable's future wife, would be visiting her grandfather. Now, these two paintings really do help to sum up Constable's view that for him painting was about feeling and emotion. So you see that here, and you see how he's been able to record that. The mill stream is on a much larger scale. So the flower and kitchen garden paintings were personal paintings for Constable, for him to have in his studio, and he never sold them during his lifetime. So they were his way of recording the place he was born in. And the mill stream is a larger piece that would have been produced for Academy show, and to kind of show, you know, his skill and the depiction of Willie Lott's house, very famous building that is seen in the Hayway. And he not only had these locations in Suffolk that became a source of inspiration for him, but I think because of moving more towards London later in his life and having less visits to Suffolk, he was able to draw some kind of comfort from his and sort of a sense of his home from his studio assistant, John Dunthorne. Now, Dunthorne was the son of John Dunthorne Senior, and so he's often referred to as Johnny. That's how Constable writes to him, writes about him. And here's a self-portrait that he produced before he moved to London to be Constable's studio assistant. It's a rather lovely oval portrait. And in a letter that Constable wrote to his wife when Johnny was quite young, Constable wrote that my neighbour Dunthorne is thriving in this world, and his family are growing up delightfully. One of his little boys has been grinding colours for me all day. He is a clever little thing and draws nicely all of his own head. So obviously Johnny was doing lots of assisting even when he was a little boy, and Constable writes many times to John Dunthorne Senior to request that Johnny comes to London and helps him. And when he did arrive, he would sit in Constable's studio, and the artists, you know, were so comfortable together that Johnny was allowed to sit at Constable's easel and assist him with, you know, with a number of artworks. We also have in the Ipswich collection a very early ink drawing that was then later transferred to a print. And it's nice to see this early depiction. Now, Johnny would go on to exhibit at the Royal Academy, and he would have many, I think he would have had quite a successful career, really, but unfortunately in the summer of 1832, he became quite ill and then had to retreat back to Suffolk. Unfortunately, he didn't revive, and he would pass away on the 2nd of November 1832. Constable went to the funeral to try and seek solace with his friend, and even after Johnny's death, Constable would write to John Dunthorne Senior and request some of his son's sketches that would help him in future artworks. So I hope that today the talk has provided you with a little bit of a snapshot of some of our collections here in Ipswich, and hopefully you'll come and visit. We have the Bloomberg Connect's Christchurch Mansion app, which is a digital guide to the collections. where you can explore more about them. But also in 2021, we did an exhibition that focused on a lot of these themes and produced the Creating Constable book, which is the only book about the Colchester and Ipswich collections, and you can purchase that through Christchurch Mansion's shop. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope it will inspire you to look a little bit more closely at Ipswich's collections on Art UK. Thank you very much.